Hello, today we're going to look at some local history. We're going to look at mining in Shropshire. An absolutely fascinating tale of great wealth generated but also great loss in terms of lives lost, particularly in mining accidents. And we're going to be looking at three raw materials that were mined: the lead, lime and also coal. And it's a history which spans the 19th century but also up to 1979. Now the first raw material we're going to look at is lead. Lead was used for roofing, for pipes and also in paint. Well, it wasn't realised until the late 19th century just quite how poisonous lead was. Anyway, in Snail Beach mine near the Stiper Stones was one of the richest concentrations of lead in all of Europe. There's evidence that the Romans mined in this area, but it wasn't until the 19th century that mining really took off. And by the 1850s 500 men were employed. But it wasn't without the occasional tragedy. The most notable was on the 6th of March 1895 when the winding cable snapped, causing 7 men to plummet to their death, and the cage they were in shrunk to a fifth of its height, from about 7.5 foot to only a few inches high, 18 inches high. Absolutely horrific accident. No one was found negligent, which is quite extraordinary, and it turned out that the cable had not been inspected for several years. Mining continued for lead in the Snail Beach area until the early 20th century when the lead mines were flooded. The next raw material we're going to look at is lime. Now, what is lime used for? It can be used to make cement when mixed with stone. It can be used to improve the soil in fields. It can be used as a building material, we'll come on to that in a moment. And it can also be used as a flux to extract iron from iron ore in a blast furnace. And in this region particularly, that was to be very important. Now, just down the road from Newport, Shropshire, is Lilleshall Abbey. Lilleshall Abbey was built of limestone, but in the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s, it was sold off to a family called the Levisons. They had been wool merchants in Wolverhampton, and from such humble beginnings, the Levisons were to build a fortune, part of which was built on the lime found in the Lilleshall area, and by the mid-19th century they were to be one of the richest families in Great Britain and in fact in all of Europe. So limestone mining in earnest in Lilleshall begins in the mid-18th century when Sir John Levison, who had inherited the lands around Lilleshall Abbey, wanted to exploit them. Now, his brother-in-law was the 3rd Duke of Bridgewater, who'd built the first industrial canal and generated massive wealth. It was used to transport coal to his ironworks. And Levison decided to build a canal from the Lilleshall lime pits near Newport to his blast furnace at Donington Wood, 5.5 miles away. Work on the canal began in 1765 and was completed in 1767. And Sir John Levison's son we'll be looking at as well. He was to become the richest man in Europe, but more on him later. So you can see in front of you a diagram of the canal, which was 5.5 miles long. I've circled a few key points. So you've got Lilleshall Abbey right in the middle. Then above that you've got where the main lime pits were, and also a branch extension of the canal. And then at on the top right you've got where the canal started, paved lane near the Fox pub just outside Newport. As I said, the canal was built by 1767. It was in operation until 1846 when a railway line was built, and that railway line ferried the lime to Donington Wood and the canal fell out of use. In this picture you have a diagram of an 18th century blast furnace, which were seen all over the area we live in. Particularly if you go to Ironbridge, you can see the remains of an 18th century blast furnace there. What happens, the basic process is lime is put in with the iron ore, and out the bottom come two things. One is pig iron, and it's called pig iron because it looked like piglets suckling on their mother, and the waste product was called slag. Slag was used as render and also to make roads as well. But that's the basic process, and that's why lime was so important. Now here's a picture of what remains of the limestone mines at Lilleshall. The underground bit, you can see, they basically constructed pillars made of limestone as well. In 1858, one of those pillars collapsed and 3 men were killed. It also tells you in this slide that limestone was put into tugboats and put on the canal to Donington Wood. It came to an end in 1860 because they'd gone so deep they hit a spring or aquifer, and there was no way of stopping that, and that flooded the mine, and that was the end of mining in Lilleshall. As you drive to school in the morning, you've no doubt noticed the Lilleshall monument on the right hand side, built by grateful tenants to the memory of the first Duke of Sutherland, George Leveson Gower. It was built in 1839, 6 years after his death. It's not the only monument to him. There's another one in the Highlands of Scotland, which is much more controversial because he owned vast estates in Scotland and he was involved in the Highland clearances where crofters were turfed off their land, the roofs were burnt, and they were forced to relocate. Now he perhaps thought he was doing it for humanitarian reasons. He was appalled by their lifestyle, but there was resistance and sometimes the army had to be called in. But he's the man most associated with the Highland clearances, and there have been calls to pull down the monument, not the Lilleshall one, but the one in the Highlands. Now, with the great wealth he'd accumulated from his estates, and also we mentioned, of course, the lime works, he became the richest man pretty much in all of Great Britain and possibly Europe. And he built Lilleshall Hall, picture there. He had a very distinguished career, but I do think it's a checkered record. And I would like you, when you drive in the morning, to reflect on that and to see the disparity between those who went down the mines, who had fairly tough existences and who risked their lives on a daily basis, with this man who was a multi-millionaire in the early 19th century. An extraordinary contrast which I'd like you to reflect on. Now the next raw material we can talk about is coal. I don't really need to explain to you the importance of coal as a fuel. It was if you like, the most basic building block of the Industrial Revolution. King coal, as it was known. And there was coal mining in this area right up until 1969. But as always, there were accidents, and there was one notable one at Kemperton Colliery in Madeley. On the 4th of December 1910, 8 miners ranging in age from 14 to 53 lost their lives when the cable lowering their cage broke, an all too familiar cause of an accident. And picture there you have the rescue team who were formed to rescue people who were stuck down mines. I think the picture here was taken in 1912, and you can see they've got breathing apparatus. A very, very dangerous job indeed. And finally, we have Granville Colliery. This began in 1860 when the Lilleshall Company sunk a pit 1,227 feet deep, and it continued operating right up until 1979. In the 1960s there was a problem because the mining shafts were undermining Lilleshall Abbey, and they had to prop up the walls, and basically the ground had gone down by about 2 foot. By 1979, mining there was no longer economically viable and the mine closed. But it's an extraordinary legacy which I would like you all to be aware of, how people made their living in this region for so many years.